Hey all, welcome back. Gary with Maker. There you are. Working today on this plastic piece that was 3D printed, prior owner for my milling machine, to basically give this hand knob at the top for the drawbar. Still need, and I'll eventually do a pneumatic piece on this. You'll still need a ratchet to get it loosened, but once done, while you're holding the collet or your tool, this serves as a really good piece to just handle the rest of that, right? Loosen it, tighten it, so on and so forth. But I got super excited one day and I ended up trying to tighten it or loosen it. Well, it wasn't ready. There was just no way. There was way too much force on that, but I do still like the piece. I do think that it was pretty functional, especially until I get off my butt and make it a little bit more power. So I've got this piece of just scrap aluminum. Very quick build on this one. So that's what we're going to work on. Cut this out, get it all set up so that that piece works a little bit better for me, and not so susceptible to my own goof ups and making that thing not work. So that's what's in store for today. So that'll be what I'll run as center. I'm just gonna turn this puppy down to where we get just a nice circle. Be just about, I should be able to be just about coming up on the same size as this. And again, those aren't critical numbers. It could have gone a hair bigger. I didn't have a lot, maybe 1/4 inch more that I could have gone to fit the machine. So where we stand. At this point, I will go run a bolt and nut through it, which I think will be adequate to be able to do what it's needed, right? Probably run a double bolt so it runs as a jam nut. And then we will chuck it up in the lathe, spin this thing down to any arbitrary size where I feel like, hey, it looks good, it works good. We're going to have some interrupted cut along the way, so I'm going to keep it super mellow. I'm really cautious, new to all this, right? So I'm not going to be super aggressive, not trying to damage my tools, and also just got to learn, right? The more comfortable I get with things, I think the more I push it, but that's where we're at. Turns out I had hardware. I think enough to get by on this and make this work as needed. Let's see how we do. That's not working. Yep, not working. All right, was doing some drilling through here, some other things. So I actually goofed up. Okay, got to make an interruption and edit this piece in. As I was going through that video, there was a few things in it. I was like, oh, just missing a lot. I had some major goof ups and foul ups where I wasn't recording at one point, and then when I was recording, it was like, I don't know, showing a corner of a table. It was just horrible visuals. So I want to cut in because there was a few things that kind of went wrong, and there was a few things that were missed. One of the things that I had initially we had seen just a bit ago was in the lathe. I was trying to set this up to essentially use this nut and bolt as this arbor, which was a fine idea, right? There wasn't a lot of strain on this piece, and it was a kind of a quick, easy way to get this turned down to the profile I was after. The problem that I was having, which if you caught it and saw, I just didn't tighten the nut and the bolt down enough, and so what was happening was that it just basically spun, right? So once I cranked it down, everything worked. That was one of the issues where I actually was not recording when I should have, so I should have had a little bit longer piece that went through that process of what the turning looked like. There was some cool things that occurred while that happened. The profile of the nut I was using was a carriage bolt, so it had this kind of this square profile at the very top, which left just the slightest indentation on this, which worked as a fantastic kind of template as you saw me filing this down to square. So while I already had the circle drill through completed, I needed to square it off, and it was really, really close. Kind of hindsight, which I wouldn't have known at the time, would have been cool to, well, I probably would have known if I paid more attention, would have been to actually make the square initially, and then the arbor, it would have slid in and held this thing and essentially not turned. Like, you know, here it's slid in. I would have had to enlarge it just slightly, but it still would have fit the milling machine. So that was one of the absolute first goof ups, with both in the video that I missed recording, and also where I was just like, that's not working, and all I kept saying was that was not working without really explaining what the hell was happening. And what it was the arbor was spinning simply because I didn't tighten it down enough. There were some other parts where I was like hooing and hawing over how I wanted to kind of make these parts so I had better grip, and I was like, oh, I'm going to use a rotary table, or oh, I was going to use the collet block. So I was hooing and hawing over it, and one of the main things was I had just got my Shoreline mill, and along with that I had the rotary table. And so the rotary table, simply this, allows for me to have clamped this down. Get a better view of that. All right. So I could have taken this, mounted it, probably again just using the arbor, set it up a little bit. I do have a mounting plate here I could have used to mount this to and held this up. And then this would allow me to index it, right? As it's turning, I can index it correctly, so I'm hitting the same spot essentially even all the way around. And so that was one option. So I was initially saying like, hey, I'll use the rotary table, and mounted that either to the Shoreline lathe. This could actually mount, it's pretty small, but this actually could also mount to my Grizzly lathe. Either of it would have worked. I ended up, as you saw at one point when I was putting together, I went with the collet block option, because as this sets in, I can have it set, right, just like so. I can turn it, it gets the next, I turn it, it gets the next side, it gets the next, and so on and so forth. And so that allows me to also be able to have these grip pieces kind of perfectly positioned so it's equal all the way across, because it's just indexing it off of the 6 sides. So that's what I ultimately went with, because that really is the easier way. So I had this, you know, basically put into the arbor. It was tightened down. By that point I knew to tighten it. I I would put it in, I'd crank it down, this is the wrong collet for this, and it would hold it secure. One of the issues I also said in there was I was just using kind of the wrong piece. So I originally used it was a 4-flute end mill is what I believe I was using to create kind of these almost like a scallop, a little bit deeper than that. And then I was like, oh, I want to, I would prefer to have, break down these edges a bit and not have them, be so rough. So chamfer those edges. I forget what bit I was using, but whatever my process was, I ended up catching just one of the corners, and while I thought I had that tight enough, it just spun it just slightly, and that's where some of that damage came from. So just a quick edit in that shows where I goofed up, how I goofed up, but also what setup I was planning to use when it was the rotary table and why. There's some good pieces on that. I think it was overly complicated versus just going with the collet block, which is what I ultimately did. This gets connected into the vise on the mill, which I think was caught in the video on that piece. So it made it a much easier process than setting this up and making that work. So, all right, I'm going to cut us back to where I was saying like, hey, I screwed this up and I missed the video. I wanted to put a little bit of context in there to bring us up to speed as to where we are. So right back at it. So I actually goofed up. I was going from a 3/8 end mill. Then I went up to a bigger one. So as I looked at it, I was like, it just felt too small of a half circle basically, and I wanted something a little bit bigger. Just felt like it would work better. So I decided I'd step it up. Well, then what ended up happening is it caught, and inside my collet here, it spun slightly. So that spinning kind of marred the finish. So I pulled it back out, threw it back on the lathe, cleaned that up, and decided, well, I'm just going to go with my smaller end mill back to the 3/8. It'll be fine. That's how it would end up looking as far as size goes. But then the next thing that I was like, hey, let's try something else. Let's try to learn it. And that was using a chamfering tool. And my chamfers aren't great. They're definitely not even. This one is the hole I kind of jacked up as I tried to change end mills. That'll be my reminder to have a better plan going in and not wing it. But these ones, it was, a cross between maybe rushing, but also I just think a little bit of trying to learn that tool and try to figure out how to best use it, because these are really uneven. I mean, at quick glance, they look fine. I could look at it and say like, overall that looks pretty good, and for what this is going to be used for, it's going to be completely adequate. I went back through and cleaned some of the edges up with a file just to make some of the points a little bit less sharp, so they're a little bit softer. But I gotta play around with that just a little bit more. I've got a couple of rough edges, and then I'm gonna hit it with the polisher, do a little bit of surfacing. So next up is some file work, just to work on some of these edges a little bit more and get this finish looking a little bit better for us. But I think it'll be good. Not too bad. First project. I can't complain. Overall, it's good. A lot of tools I haven't used before, so we'll keep playing around. I'm gonna play with files. All right, after playing around with the file and oil stone, I wanted a bit of a texture. So the raised parts, I wanted to have a machined look and then polish up the center and the sides. I think it works, but it also fits quite good. And that's what it's for. Works well. Really stoked. Nice. Wraps this one up. Learned some things. Good enough to last for a while. You could see some of these are a little bit wanky and funky, but I guess they're more even than I thought. All right, closes this one out. Thank you for watching.